your doodle sheet Unity and Diversity Part 1 notes. It is also known as your unit or your unit notes number 2. So we are going to go through our presentation, and this is for if you were absent on this day. There's going to be 2 videos. I'm going to split it in half for you, and we did the first page one day and page number 2 the second day. So there are lots of kinds of things, and they look really different, meaning they're diverse or there's diversity. Is there one category that we could put everything that we've looked at from the odd one out activity to this photo right here into? Hopefully from the odd one out activity, you have said that they are all living things. However, what we know and what we've looked at or things you might think of is only a tiny sample of the over 8.75 million species on Earth today. So there's over 8.75 million species on Earth. So I promise you, you probably have not heard of all of them. I know I haven't. But this picture just gives you kind of a sampling of the things that we do know about and we probably have seen or heard of. So in the notes that we're going to go through, and I will show you this, you're going to think about how you know something is living. What is it about them that caused you to define something as living? What do living things do? Maybe what do they have in common? How do you know something is alive? So we're going to do a lot of like switching between screens right now. But that's what you put here in box A, right there. So right now, take 30 seconds or so, and you're going to write down your thoughts on what all living things have in common. How do you know something is living? We didn't really get to modify these notes for virtual learning. We weren't really expecting that this year, so part B, we obviously can't do right now. So we're just going to skip on down to class list C. So if you were in class for this, we obviously shared all our thoughts on what living things have in common. But our class list, we're going to go over basically the characteristics of life. So you should have either viewed those notes that I shared with you or done those notes for your Wednesday activity, but they should be done. So there should be a review. We're going to list out what is similar about all living organisms, and it needs to be true for everything that's alive. So everything that we would consider living is made of one or more cells. It also displays organization, meaning it starts with a cell, many cells form tissues, a bunch of different tissues form an organ, a bunch of organs together form an organ system, and finally, all of this put together as a whole is an organism, so something that's alive. Hopefully that is easier for you guys to see. Number 3 is that it grows and develops. So obviously, well, I hope you guys aren't all the same size that you were when you were born, or even think about a puppy or a kitten. They start off really small and then they kind of grow into their fur. Or you think of like little chickens or ducks or geese, how they have little ducklings and their little fuzzy feathers, and then they grow into adults. 4th is that living things reproduce. Think of babies. So even things like bacteria can reproduce. They just split cells and they divide. We obviously reproduce by having a baby. Eggs would be another way that you could reproduce. Not us, but another animal. Number 5 now is responding to stimuli or the environment. So for us, that could mean if we touch something that's hot and we, like before burning ourselves, we release our hand and let it go. Another way that we could do this is through like a plant. Lots of plants will face the sunlight. So if you have a plant that's starting to like lean or bend, it's usually trying to do that because it is getting more sunlight to produce more energy. Something else is like if a cat or a dog, they touch something or they don't like it and they back away. So any kind of response to the environment or change because of something going on in your environment is a response to stimuli. Number 6 is requiring energy. A lot of you guys mentioned food, or like they take in food or nutrients somehow. Other things like plants and fungus and things like that are able to make their own energy by taking in sunlight. They don't need to eat something else. But we do need to eat food, obviously, to have energy and to maintain our life processes. The next one is maintaining homeostasis. This means just an internal balance. So that would be for humans. If you are cold, you end up shivering or getting goosebumps. That's your body's response to being too cold and trying to maintain an internal temperature. And another one is if you're too hot. So if you're exercising or it's really hot outside, your body tries to cool you off by sweating. Other things that our body does that we might not know about is our internal like glucose monitoring. So people with diabetes, they might not have this monitor and they have to take their insulin. The last one is adaptations evolving over time. So this is when an organism changes over time. So you probably won't be able to see it in your lifetime, but some you can. It just depends on how fast the organism reproduces. So, for example, there were some moths out in England that changed from a lighter color to a darker color based on some environmental conditions, and then they changed back to like a darker color. We're gonna investigate that and explain that. We're also going to take a look at mice that changed fur color and the beaks of finches and how they got bigger or smaller over time. So in order for organisms to survive, they're able to change a few things about them that help them survive better. Just making sure that we are on the right page. All right, so we did our class list together. Awesome. So before we move on to box D, is so far we have observed that there are, number one, a huge number of different and unique organisms. So during the odd one out, you were able to determine which one was different or which one was the odd one out or the imposter, or however you want to phrase that, based on picking which one did not look or didn't have similarities to the other ones. We also, though, noticed that some things have a lot in common. For example, if you did the odd one out in number 2, there was a bunch of corals and then there was a starfish. I know a lot of you guys said that all those corals looked very similar, that they had a lot in common, maybe the color, maybe where they're located, maybe how they take in food, or that they all stayed the same in the same area. So those, you can tell if something is more closely related to something else based on like what it looks like, what it does, that kind of thing. So we're going to now take these 2 observations, and I want you guys to think about kind of like what this means. So right now your job is to, in box D, write down any thoughts or questions you have about these 2 observations. Maybe just like, how can that be? How can you have something be different but also be the same? Like, how does that work? Maybe why does this happen? Any thoughts or questions you have about these 2 ideas, because they're kind of contradictory. They don't really go together, but at the same time, they're also both true. So that's what you are doing right now in box D. I'm also going to write down the definition of bio and the definition of diversity so that you know what this word biodiversity right here means. We're going to highlight that too. But right now you should be writing down any thoughts or questions you have about these 2 observations. All right, so we just have a few more slides to go through, and if you have any other thoughts or questions, you can add them to this doodle box. They are called like doodle sheets or thought processing notes, because this is where, unless I write something down, it's for where you to write down all your ideas, your thoughts, your questions that you have about what we're learning. So that's going to help you organize your information. And unless I write something down with you, you can use these boxes however you need to kind of think through what we're learning. So if we go back here to our slideshow, all organisms do have some similarities, but when you grouped them, like in the odd one out, we did find out that some are more alike than others. So here's another example. I can't really tell. Oh, that the first one looks like a little shark. The next one looks like a catfish. Then there's a starfish, some other sort of fish on the ends. So obviously these fish have a lot more in common than, say, the starfish. But think about what's in common and what's different and why. We also see a lot of similarities among living things in general. Even between ourselves, we are a living thing, we are a mammal, and other organisms. So if you take a look at all of the ones across the top of the screen, we have a human baby, and then I believe it's a chimp, and then a gorilla, and then a cat. Things I've noticed is that there's like kind of a space on your head, the top of your head, between your eyes, that's like looks like eyebrows, or like the brow bone on your skull. And you have your eyes, and then underneath your eyes is your nose. Underneath your nose is your mouth. So that structure is solid throughout all of those organisms. All of these living things also have some kind of hair or fur or something that kind of like grows or gives them warmth. Then what I noticed in the bottom two pictures is obviously the mannerisms. So there's similar mannerisms between other organisms. They're both relaxing, they're chilling, they're kind of cooling, taking their own time. Obviously, we still have arms and fingers and things like that, but just kind of how we spend our time, how we lay, that it can even be in common. So throughout history and throughout time, humans have noticed these patterns, and humans are just curious, and we like to categorize things and make them neat and tidy, have them make sense. So throughout history, when they've been classifying things, they started off with this step structure here on the left, where we categorize them first from non-living to living. Then from the group that was living, they noticed that's still a really big group, so let's split it up even further. So there are things like plants, like trees and grass, versus animals, where plants, trees, grass, that kind of thing doesn't really move. It doesn't need to eat anything really, it just takes in some sunlight, but they also have similarities. Like they grow, they can respond to stimuli, they reproduce. Then they thought, well, animals could even be broken down further. And we know that human beings are right now like the most sophisticated or most complex living organism that we know of. This grouping or classification was called taxonomy, or is called taxonomy. People still study it. They use it. If you discover a new species or anything, you'd have to use this idea of classification that was put forward or founded by Carl Linnaeus. He wrote this book. It's on the right side, based on how we group things. So if you look at the blue circles here, it goes, the biggest like grouping is a kingdom. Then underneath that is phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So you get more specific as you go into the middle of those blue circles. For example, you might know that humans are called Homo sapiens. That is the genus and the species of our name, our scientific name, and it's how we are classified.